Hi, everybody. Gene here. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, where every single week we answer the most common and uncommon questions about tapping and EFT so you can eliminate self-sabotage and take the action that you want. The podcast that you're about to hear was actually recorded a couple of weeks ago, which on March 25th feels like a few months ago. The world has changed a lot in that time. And it got shuffled to this week as I've been moving things around, creating the no resources. If you haven't checked them out yet, if you go to tappingqa.com/COVID-19, tappingqa.com/COVID-19, I'm continuing to gather resources from all over the world for tapping to help you to manage what is going on in the world. The podcast you're about to hear, I think, is still really prescient. The advice that Dolly Parton gives, that I quote in this episode, is something that I think is really useful in these times. And I did exactly what Dolly told us to do, or what Dolly tells you to do in this particular episode on Monday. I just gave myself permission to sit on my couch and for about 30 minutes, just feel real deeply. And in doing that, it made a huge difference for me. And I hope it makes a huge difference for you. Enjoy. This is Gene Montrose-Stelly, and welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast, recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 442, originally aired March 25th, 2020. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Today, we are going to talk about and tap around the ability to feel emotions deeply, and a really interesting story from Dolly Parton on how we ended up in the place of tapping on this today. Before we do that, two quick things. First of all, I'd like to thank all of the supporters of the Tapping Q&A podcast. These are people who have chosen to financially every single month support the podcast to ensure that these keep coming out consistently and I can make the time and space so I can do these shows out of my busy work week. If you'd like to become a supporter of the show as well, all you need to do is go to tappingqa.com/support. Not only will you get a chance to know that you're having an impact on something like this, you're also going to be in a circumstance where you receive some amazing bonuses so that you can continue to develop and improve your tapping. The second thing is, if you haven't done so already, we have a free 10-part guide on how you can use tapping to eliminate self-sabotage. All you need to do is go to tappingqa.com, click on the big blue button. If you happen to be listening to this right now in your web player, up in the right-hand column, you will see a big blue button. Click on that, and we will give you those 10 steps. There's audios, there's videos, there's tap-alongs, there's scripts. It's a way of helping you to navigate the tapping process so you become more effective day to day so you can take the action that you want. A couple of weeks ago, I was lucky enough to attend something called the On Air Festival. It's hosted every single year here in Brooklyn. It's actually in my neighborhood, which is super, super convenient. It's the fourth year that it has happened. And it is a podcasting conference. And it's an interesting intersection of a podcasting conference because part of it is instructional and part of it is live recordings and tapings of a bunch of really interesting shows. And so over the course of 3 days, it's a beautiful, amazing experience because these are people who are at the absolute top of the podcast game, creating things that are just beautiful and thoughtful. And to hear the creatives talk about their process was just wonderful. And I learned a lot of great things over the course of those 3 days. One of my favorite, if not my favorite presentation was done by Shima Oliaee. And Shima works for the Radiolab team here in New York City. Radiolab's been around for a really long time, and it is one of my favorite podcasts of all time. And with the success of the show over the course of the last decade, they've gotten a chance to branch off and try some different things. And recently, they did a project called Dolly Parton's America. And Shima got to be one of the two producers with Joe Abumrad on this particular show. And so she did a number of the interviews, particularly interviews with Dolly that lasted for hours and hours and hours. And so at the On Air Festival, she was just talking about the process and the lessons that she learned from Dolly Parton. And Dolly Parton is really an interesting person. One of the reasons that they chose to focus the show on her was, as Shima put it, is she has no negative Q rating. And a Q rating is what marketers decide whether or not a celebrity is someone who has a positive or negative impression. So the positive part is these are the people who think of you positively, and the negative number is the people who think of you negatively. And then there's a group of people who just don't know you exist. And what they found with Dolly Parton as they were doing this work is internationally, she was loved and renowned. And in listening to the interviews with Dolly and listening to the interviews with the people around Dolly, one of the things that became very, very clear is people have consistently underestimated her for her entire life in what they thought she was capable of how smart she was, and how she navigated things. And she is truly a wise woman. And I don't say that flippantly because there are people who I love what they create, but they don't necessarily have anything to say away from their creation. Dolly is not one of those people. And I know it looked a little hypey calling a podcast episode what I learned from Dolly Parton about tapping. And sometimes people do that in marketing because it's a creative way to get someone's attention. I wonder how they're going to make this thing, how they're going to make this connection. And that's not the case here. And I love the podcast series, but this particular quote was pulled out by Shima that I had heard, but it didn't register in the way that it did when she isolated it as a lesson from Dolly Parton. And Dolly was talking about the fact that how deeply she feels emotion. I wouldn't be surprised if Dolly isn't an empathic person, because she's just talking about her connection to the people around her and the way that she feels their emotions and want what's best for them. But she was also talking about her own emotional experience. And she said something that it's a fascinating way to think about it. She was talking about feeling emotion and positive emotion and negative emotion, all the emotion. And she said, when I feel an emotion, I am fully committed to it. And that's such a fascinating thought. When I feel an emotion, I am fully committed to it. And so what that means to me, and I'm not exactly sure what it means to her because vocabulary and language is imprecise when we're trying to describe what is going on. But what I hear in that statement is someone who's saying this emotion has showed up and I need to be fully present to it because the emotion has information and it's where I am in this particular moment. And I need to just tune into this emotional guidance. And with the negative emotions that we feel, it's really easy to do things consciously or subconsciously to get away from those emotions. In a subconscious way, we might do some emotional eating. We might go distract ourselves in some way. Recently, I was having a really hard time. And so I consciously chose to watch a couple of movies that I really love that make me happy. And so I was choosing to do something that was changing my emotional resource state. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are times in which we need to be in a place where we're just taking care of ourselves. But if we're going to move through and we're going to truly understand the emotions that we're feeling, then I think what Dolly Parton said is exactly right. We need to be fully committed to the emotion, meaning that we need to step into it and embrace it and understand it for what it is. Now, that doesn't mean that the emotion is always conveying something that's accurate. We know that our goal in tapping is to get to a proportionate, well-informed emotional response. But it's difficult to make an emotion proportionate if you're not willing to engage with it and commit to it. And there's a really common fear that comes with this. The fear is that if I engage too deeply with the emotion is going to overcome me. It's going to be too much. It's going to be too devastating. I'm going to feel it too deeply. And so there's a part of us that wants to tiptoe up to that emotion. And so I don't want you to take this as advice of when I feel an emotion, I need to throw myself headlong into it and always feel it deeply. That there are times and places where it's okay not to take care of ourselves, to work through a day in a way that is healthier, where we're not overcome by that emotion. But the emotion is going to be heard one way or another. It is not as if I can have an emotion inside of me and I can just repress it down and eventually it's going to evaporate on its own. At some point, it needs to come out. And the sooner that we are fully committed to an emotion, the sooner we are to get it out so we're not living inside of it. So we're just going to do a quick little tapping today to give ourselves permission to just do what Dolly says, to be completely committed to that emotion. So to begin with, what I want you to do is just tap on the side of your hand, take a nice big deep breath. Just feel yourself in your body. Take another nice big deep breath. And just repeat after me. I know my emotions are just information. My emotional guidance system is communicating with me all of the time. My emotions are just a part of my system letting me know how I'm interpreting what is going on. My emotions are what shows up after I evaluate the circumstance I am in. Emotions can feel big. Emotions can feel overwhelming. Sometimes my emotions can be too much. I know that if I don't experience my emotions now, I will experience them sometime in the future. Bottling my emotions up just means I'm not dealing with them now. Because I will have to deal with them at some point. There's a part of me that's afraid that if I feel my emotions deeply, that my emotions are going to overcome me. That my emotions are going to consume me. That my emotions are going to derail me. It's good I recognize how my emotions impact me day to day. I also know when I commit to my emotions fully, I can understand what they're trying to communicate. I can understand if they are well informed. I can understand if they are proportionate. It is good for me to feel my emotions. I can then process my emotions. I can learn from my emotions. I can heal my experience. And I can move on. I give myself permission to be gentle with my emotional state. Knowing that it really can be overwhelming. When I am easy with my emotions, when I am easy with myself, I create the space for transformation. I create the space for healing. I give myself permission in a healthy way to commit to my emotions. When my emotions are heard, it creates space for healing, which is better for me. Nice deep breath. I understand why big emotions are scary. Big emotions are scary because they can just derail us. And being in a situation where we can give ourselves the space to just slowly and gently allow ourselves to commit more and more to the emotions, knowing it doesn't have to be an all or nothing process. is something that is going to create health and well-being for all of us. If you know someone in your life who could use something like this, again, be our ambassador, pass it along. Don't spam your inbox and send it to everybody in the world. But if there's someone you know who would really appreciate this, please pass it along. It would mean the world to me. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the podcast. In podcasting parlance, subscribe is absolutely free. You can get the podcast on Stitcher, Spotify, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, DeezerRadio.com. Basically, everywhere you find audio, you can find the Tapping Q&A podcast. In some places, it's a subscribe. In some places, it's a follow, but it's always free. That way, as each new episode comes out, it's delivered to your smart device right away. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, I can always be reached, Gene, Gene, at tappingqa.com. Let me know if there's a topic or a subject you'd like us to cover in the future. I'm getting ready to do a bunch of interviews that are going to roll out over the spring and the summer. Let me know if there's someone you want me to talk to. For the Tapping Q&A podcast, this is Gene Montrastelli. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. The Tapping Q&A podcast is copyright Gene Montrastelli Tapping Q&A. All views expressed by guests are those of the guests and not necessarily of Gene Montrastelli and Tapping Q&A.